It was a quiet night in the middle of a long road trip through the countryside. Mark had been driving for hours, the roads empty and the world beyond his headlights consumed by darkness. His car's engine hummed steadily as the miles passed by, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of trees and the low hiss of the tires on the asphalt. As he approached a particularly desolate stretch of highway, a strange sense of unease began to settle over him. The trees seemed to close in on either side, casting eerie shadows that danced in the corners of his vision. Mark was used to driving at night, but tonight felt different. It was almost as though something was off. As he rounded a bend, his headlights suddenly caught a figure standing on the side of the road. A young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, dressed in a long, dark coat. She had a vintage look about her, almost out of place for the modern day, and was holding her thumb out, as if she were hitchhiking. Mark hesitated for a moment. It was late, and the road was desolate, but something in him made him stop. He had always been the type to help someone in need, and he couldn't leave her out here alone. He rolled down the window and called out, "Need a ride?" The woman smiled faintly and nodded, walking towards the car. She opened the door and climbed in without a word, her movements slow and deliberate. As she settled into the passenger seat, Mark couldn't help but notice how cold the air felt, even though the car's heater was running. The woman was quiet, her eyes staring straight ahead, as though lost in thought. Mark tried to make conversation. "Where are you headed?" he asked, glancing at her from time to time as he drove. She didn't immediately respond. After a long silence, she replied in a soft voice, "Just home." The word sounded odd, but Mark dismissed it. He figured she was tired and didn't feel like talking. He continued driving, the silence between them growing heavier by the minute. The road stretched out endlessly ahead, and the only sound was the hum of the engine. Minutes passed. The woman didn't speak, her gaze still fixed on the road ahead, her face pale in the dim light. Mark began to feel a creeping sense of discomfort. He glanced over at her again. She hadn't moved an inch since she got in the car. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. She nodded slightly but didn't answer. Mark looked away, unsure of how to respond. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The atmosphere in the car felt colder now, like the chill of the night had seeped inside. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and his mind raced as he tried to understand what was happening. Suddenly, he stole another glance at her. She was gone. Mark's heart leapt into his throat. He slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt in the middle of the road. He frantically looked around, half expecting to see her standing by the side of the road again. But there was nothing, no sign of her anywhere. His breath quickened, panic creeping in as he quickly got out of the car, shining his flashlight into the darkness. There was no trace of the woman, no footprints, no sign of movement. The night was still and silent, and the only thing that seemed real was the beating of his heart. Mark's mind raced as he tried to piece together what had just happened. Had he imagined it? Was he so tired that he had hallucinated the entire encounter? As he stood there, confused and shaken, the sound of an approaching car broke the silence. A local farmer, who had been driving past, stopped to check on him. "You all right?" the farmer asked, noticing Mark standing by the side of the road, his face pale and wide-eyed. I think I saw something," Mark stammered. "A woman. She vanished." The farmer gave him a long look, as if deciding how much to say. After a moment, he spoke in a low voice. "You're not the first. People have been talking about her for years. There's a story about a woman who hitchhikes around here, and if you pick her up, she vanishes before you even know it." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean? Who is she?" The farmer hesitated, glancing around nervously before speaking again. "She was in a car accident a long time ago. She died out here, somewhere along this stretch of road. People say her spirit still haunts this highway, looking for someone to give her a ride. And if you pick her up, she'll disappear, just like that." Mark's hands trembled as he tried to process what the farmer had said. Could it be true? He had heard rumors about ghost stories and legends before, but this felt different. He couldn't shake the image of the woman's pale face, her cold eyes staring ahead, and the chill that seemed to have settled in the car. With a nod, the farmer got back in his truck and drove off, leaving Mark standing alone in the middle of the road. The night felt even darker now, the trees pressing in, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Mark got back in his car, his hands shaking as he started the engine. He glanced at the passenger seat, half expecting to see the woman sitting there, her cold eyes watching him. But the seat was empty, the road was silent, and the only thing he could hear was the hum of the engine as he drove away. But from that night on, every time Mark drove that stretch of highway, he couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him from the shadows, waiting for the next person to stop, just to vanish once again.